let's talk about 1998. About you were discussing about your husband. Can you tell the audience what you're talking about?
My husband was kidnapped and kept in for long periods of time in Oakland. And the police did nothing. They didn't help me to try to find him. I went down and filed a missing report and told him he was kidnapped. And I knew who kidnapped him.
Who?
The Caicos. John Caicos.
And how was he affiliated to that?
How was he affiliated? He was going to be partners with my husband, and they were going to do construction because my husband was out of work.
But apparently that's not what Caicos wanted, right?
Right.
Instead, what did he do? He forged checks
Yes.
and put a gun to your husband's head?
Yes.
And he wrote out checks that he shouldn't have wrote out, right?
Right. He had other people. He introduced my husband to other people that and got him on crack cocaine.
Remember the FBI was looking at Caicos, and what were they discussing when you found those papers?
No,
On
the
Caicos.
FBI didn't even look into it.
But you had some papers you found of Caicos, remember?
Yes.
And there was a man that was investigating him. It was in the papers.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Well, anyways, what I observed that the papers were has to do with the FBI met him, and they wanted to investigate him why he was making all the forges of checks, Caicos.
Right.
But somehow the conversation didn't last. They met in a restaurant.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that was, I met that agent before my husband was kidnapped.
Mm-hmm. What happened to the agent?
I don't know. He's still with the FBI as far as I know. But he didn't look into it. He didn't look into anything.
So
We were talking about the mafia, how they were in the neighborhood.
So you're saying basically that the investigation on your husband's kidnap, the Alameda police didn't do anything about it, right?
Exactly.
So it was just...
And the car got stolen. Another thing, and it kept getting stolen, and we kept getting it back. And the last time it was stolen, I found it. It was belonged to a neighbor down the street, and he got it from Ron Good. He bought it from Ron Good's place, and somehow it got there. And I told the police I found our car, and they wouldn't even help me to get it back.
Well, you know, that shows that the police, sometimes they don't do their duties and their job when they're supposed to be doing, to look for vehicles that have been stolen. So let's get back to what I was talking to you about, the Caicos. Can you tell me a little bit more what happened to the Caicos?
Well, all I know is John Caicos died after my husband's death. He died.
And how does Paul Block fit into the picture?
Oh, he was associate of John Caicos. They knew it. They were.
So they were both gangsters, right?
Yes.
And who said that not to trust Jeffrey Allen?
Larry Caicos, the son of John Caicos.
And he worked for the IRS, right?
Yes, he worked for the IRS.
What happened when they tried to put a heater in your house, one of the contractors? Who was that?
That was John Caicos.
What did you tell him?
He wanted to drill holes through the floor, and I wouldn't let him. And I says, "Where's the contractor's license? I need to see a contractor's license." In fact, I ran him off, and then the next thing I know, in retaliation, he took my husband.
Okay, so these people were all affiliated, and you said your husband saw them affiliated with drugs, that he caught
Yes.
them in Oakland with drugs?
Yes.
And how was that tied into his murder?
It has to do with the mafia. This is the mafia that killed my husband. My husband told me that he was on a hit list for the mafia, that they were going to get him. He knew they were going to get him.
And just before he passed away, you said you heard something?
I heard the neighbors talking, and they said the chief ordered it. And I knew they were talking about my
You're talking about the Chief Bernie Matthew, right?
Yes.
Did you know that Bernie Matthew was married to Victoria Hudson? She was a newspaper reporter. They had domestic violence, and they had to separate because he was having affairs outside of his marriage.
Yes, I heard
He was
about
not
that.
only a cheater, but he's also a not very good chief of police,
Exactly.
and he was not trustworthy.
Exactly. I think he was with the mafia too. Because when he first came to Alameda to become chief, he had his meeting at the Italian Hall here in Alameda. That's where his meeting was.
So you're talking about the Italian mafia, right?
Yes, I am.
I see. So this all comes to a grip where it's all dealing with your husband trying to investigate. Tell the audience what kind of job your husband had before he passed away.
Well, he wasn't working.
But he was a merchant marine, and then
Marine.
he got a certificate in what?
And he went to Lawton Academy and graduated.
For a detective, right?
Yes.
So he was doing some detective work,
Yes.
trying to bust some people that were in the drug cartel, right?
Yes. And he had meetings with the police, with the chief. He went over to the police station, and I remember one day he said he had to go meet with the chief. And there was somebody there when my husband was kidnapped. I talked to a police officer who retired. I forget his name. And he knew my husband's social security number, and he knew all the personal information that only my husband should know.
So in other words, you're trying to tell the audience that you can't trust the police,
Yes.
and to be
I am.
aware, and you say sometimes it's tied with murder, right?
Yes.
So what you want to let the audience know that this is not just a conspiracy, that this is really true, what's happening. Now let me get back, before we end this meeting, let me get back to where I was talking about Betty Romero. Remember her?
Yes.
Well, Betty Romero did say something about a very important issue about March 25th, 2002, when Mr. Jawad, Mr. M. Jawad, Muhammad Jawad, went to the vacation house. And
Yeah.
normally he doesn't take a man, but that day he did.
Yes.
And I assume that it was Antonio Alo
Yes.
that now owns what?
St. Joseph's Church,
And what high school?
Notre Dame High School.
So that's the key component on what is going on. And why did he go after Mr. Jawad?
Because he had a lot of property and a lot of money.
And so right now they're wealthy.
Yes.
They're doing quite well.
Yes.
And unfortunately, Margaret Jawad passed away this year.
Yes.
That's an unfortunate thing. But she told me when she was alive that Mr. Jawad never gave her anything. And it was a few years ago. And according to her divorce, she only was left with one piece of property that was on Sherman Street.
Yes.
And all of a sudden the deeds were switched around back and forth.
Right.
Now you know it's tied into something very suspicious.
Yes.
So that's what I wanted to tell the audience. We will continue this conversation later. Thank you.
Yes.